And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Thank you for joining us today on the Marine segment. My name is Emily Niebuhr. Let's take a look, starting out looking at your sea ice edge. As you can see, much of the Chukchi is starting to become ice-free, especially off of Point Hope. Even outside of Kaktovik, mostly ice-free. Again, the white denotes concentration, not thickness. So it's showing us where we're having greater than 80% sea ice concentration. So you can see near Ukjavik, there is still a lot of sea ice at greater than 80% concentration. Meanwhile, Prudhoe Bay, along the coast at least, is less than 80% concentration. Let's take a quick look at your weather features that are going to be impacting the marine forecast over the next few days. We do have a low pressure system that is over the eastern Aleutian Islands with a front that's across the Alaska Peninsula. We have a high pressure system sitting across much of the Gulf of Alaska right now. We also have a high pressure system nudging into the western portions of the Bering Sea as well. Meanwhile, we have a low in the central portions of the Bering Sea. For Friday, that low drifts northeastwards towards Seward Peninsula. To the south, that low drifts in towards Bristol Bay with its front sitting across Kodiak Island on Friday. Meanwhile, high pressure builds in more across the Bering Sea, and we also have high pressure building in across, towards the Panhandle. Saturday, that low continues to push eastward into the Gulf of Alaska, and that ridge starts to diminish. Meanwhile, high pressure starts to push in across portions of Bristol Bay. Finally, we have a weak low pressure system with its front moving in towards the western Bering. Let's take a look at your Friday marine forecast. Again, for interior portions of the Panhandle, we're generally looking at waves 2 to 3 feet and winds up to about 15 knots. Of course, that can always vary in channel terrain and be a little higher, so always be ready for slightly higher winds and waves. As we go towards the outer waters along the Gulf of Alaska coast, we're looking at waves of about 3 to 5 feet and winds of 15 to 20 knots. For your Saturday, slightly stronger winds across portions of the interior Panhandle, generally 3 feet across much of the area, and winds of about 15 knots. As you go along the Gulf Coast, we have waves of about 3 to 5 feet and winds of 15 to 20 knots. As we go towards the north central coast, the biggest wind and wave will be channeled next to Kodiak Island. We're looking at waves of about 8 feet, winds of about 30 knots. As you go south out of Homer, be aware of rapidly changing wind and wave conditions. The rest of Cook Inlet, we're looking at waves of 2 to 3 feet, winds 10 to 15 knots. As we look along the North Gulf Coast, we are looking at waves of 2 to 5 feet, again with strongest ones near Kodiak Island, and winds 10 to 25 knots. Meanwhile, Prince William Sound will be pretty sheltered at 10 knots and waves 2 feet. Saturday, you can see the winds and waves will diminish, but we still have stronger winds and waves south of Homer, so about 4-foot waves and winds up to 15 knots. But again, Prince William Sound looks pretty sheltered at 10 knots, waves about 2 feet. And even as you go out into unsheltered waters, we're really looking at waves of 2 to 3 feet, winds of 10 to 15 knots with that high pressure system. As we go further west, we have stronger winds and waves for your Friday. South of Falls Pass, we have waves about 5 feet and generally 4 to 5 feet across much of the area south of the Alaska Peninsula. Waves are a little calmer, looking at 2 to 3 feet in areas of Bristol Bay, but generally winds of 15 to 25 knots. Saturday, as that low pressure system starts to move into the area, you see we have the strongest winds and waves are going to be to the southeast of Kodiak Island. So again, we're looking at waves of about 4 to 5 feet, winds 20 to 25 knots. Meanwhile, behind the system in Bristol Bay, we're looking at waves of 2 to 3 feet, winds of about 15 knots. As we go towards the Aleutian Islands, we have winds of about 25 near Shemya. We also have near the central Aleutians, we're looking at winds or waves from 3 to 5 feet, winds about 15 knots. As we move into Saturday, as that low pressure system starts to sneak in towards Shemya, we have a slight uptick in the waves at about 7 feet, but still generally winds 20 to 25 feet. Central and eastern Aleutian Islands, we're looking at waves of 4 to 5 feet with winds of about 15 to 20 knots. Bristol Bay Area, we're generally seeing winds of about 10 to 15 knots, waves about 2 feet. Near the Pribilof Islands, winds will be 15 knots and waves will be 4 feet. And up in Nome on Friday, winds will be about 10 knots and waves 2 feet. We have a slight uptick in Nome on Saturday. Winds will be about 3 feet. Winds will be 15 knots and waves will be 3 feet. Near Pribilofs, the winds will be at 10 knots, waves 3 feet. But generally, we're looking at 2 to 3 feet along the coast and 15 knots. For your Arctic coast on Friday, we're seeing generally winds of about 10 knots and variable, and we're seeing waves of about 2 feet. Saturday afternoon, we're starting to see winds a little stronger, especially near Wales and Shishmaref. Winds about 15 knots, waves 3 feet. And along the North Arctic coast, waves 2 to 3 feet, winds of 10 to 15 knots.